Hello ladies and gentlemen, in this episode we're going to write some code that'll make working with the MLB API a little bit easier. As you can see, I've got the default application up and running in the simulator, and I've got my code open in a code editor. And before we start working on the API, I want to set up my project a little bit. One thing that I always like to do is create a test screen where I can test any kind of code that I'm currently developing. And I'm just going to reuse the Home tab as my test screen. So I'm going to come into the Screens folder, and I'm going to open up the home screen and first delete out all of this stuff that I don't really need. So everything inside of the outside view, and all of these functions here I won't be using, so I'm going to delete those as well. And I don't need any of these styles either. So I'll save and reload. And now I have a blank screen, and I'm going to also adjust some of this stuff a little bit. Don't need any of this. Just taking out everything that I don't need, so I have a nice blank screen to start off with. And I'll save, and we can maybe put some text here that says test screen. Okay, and I like to use this screen as a way of testing out new code because it's the first screen that appears when I refresh, and whenever I'm finished with my application, I can just delete this and I don't have to worry about it having any bugs or anything like that because it's only a test screen. Okay, now we're going to jump over to the place where all of the MLB data is stored. It was this website, which you can find by doing a Google search. And you can call it an API if you'd like. It's really, you could also think of it as just a website with a whole bunch of web pages with data on it. So we're going to need to write some code that makes accessing this data a lot easier from a program like our React Native application. So real quick, I want to look at the data here. It looks like all the years are in websites with a year and an underscore and a 4-digit year. So let's go into the current year. All the months are formatted the same way with 2-digit months. So let's go into the month of May. And then the days also work the same way. They've got 2-digit days. So that's good information to know. And we'll jump in today. And remember, there's some weird thing where if there's a slash at the end, it doesn't work. So you got to delete the slash and go there. And this is where the majority of the data exists for any particular day. And for our application, we're going to need to make it flexible so that the day can be adjusted. So we'll need to write some code to get this URL so then we can find all of these additional files. And a couple of notes here. These directories that start with GID, these represent all of the games that happened on that particular day. And if you go into that directory, you get more information about that particular game. So we're probably going to need to use those. And another thing that I noticed when I was looking at this before making the video is the epg.xml file. That appears to have all the information about the games as well. So I think what we'll need to do is figure out the year, month, and day that we want to get data for, and then we will parse the epg.xml file to get the list of games. And within this, it also has these GID directories, and we can grab those from there and then use these directories to get more information about that game. So I'm going to jump back over to the code, and in the API directory, I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call this the MLB Game Day API.js. And here I'm going to export default class MLB Game Day API. And this class will just contain a whole bunch of functions that we'll use to gather data from this website. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is create a constant for the base URL of this website, which is everything up to the .com. So I'm going to copy that. And down below my class, I'm going to say MLB Game Day API.base URL equals that. And we'll have to use this whenever we're constructing URLs. We'll prepend this to every URL. Okay, inside of my class, let's create a constructor And it won't have anything in it for now, but we'll just use it, keep it there for in case we want it in the future. Now, like I said, we'll probably want some way of getting this URL because we're going to need it for whatever day we're currently looking at. So I'm going to copy and paste this URL into my code here just for reference. And then let's create a function. We'll make it a static function called getDayURL. And that function will take a year, a month, and a day as an input. And its output will be a URL formatted like this. So the first thing we want to do is convert the month and day to a 2-digit format. So we can say if the month that's passed in is less than 10, we're going to say month equals 0 plus month. So if it's a 3, for example, it will convert it to a 0.3. But if it's 11, it'll stay at 11. We'll do the same thing for the day. If the day is less than 10, then we say day equals 0 plus day. Now here we're going to format the URL. So we will return whatever the URL is. We're just going to be concatenating a whole bunch of strings. So we'll say MLB Game Day API .base URL, which is this thing right here that comes before everything. And then we are going to add the component /game/MLB, which I believe is just a constant. So let's do /components/game/MLB. And now we need to add the year portion, which is just going to be year underscore and the year that was passed in, and a slash. Then the month portion, which is month underscore and the month and a slash. And finally the day portion, which is day underscore plus day. And this should give us the full day URL, but we can test it out in our test screen. So we'll jump over here to the home screen and let's create a constructor here. And don't forget to call super props. And we will import our MLB Game Day API from, we need to go up one level because we're in the screens directory currently, and go into the API directory and in the MLB Game Day API file. And now we can say var URL equals MLB Game Day API dot get day URL, and let's give it today's date, which is May 24th, 2018. And then we will console.log the URL. And one thing I wanted to mention is I'm getting all of these warnings in the console for some reason. We'll just have to ignore those for now. It's a little bit annoying, but I couldn't figure out why they were happening. So, okay. So let me save this and reload. And it looks like we have gotten an error that says getDayURL is not a function. And I think that's because I didn't save this file yet. Okay, so I hadn't saved that, and so it didn't realize that that was there. So now we jump over to the console, and we can see here is our URL. Why don't I just copy and paste this? This thing is messing me up. Well, maybe I can click on it. Okay, it says it's not found. And the problem there is I forgot to put a slash after the MLB and the year. So I'm going to come back to my code and fix that. So I'll need a slash here. Sorry about that. Reload, and here's the new URL, and there we go. So now we have all of the data for that day. Okay, so the next thing, why don't we go ahead and try to parse the epg.xml file and get a list of games for that particular day. So in the code, I'm going to make a new function. This will also be static, and it'll be called getListOfGamesForDay, and it'll also take a year, month, and a day. And we need to get the URL for this epg.xml file right here, which is just going to be the day URL plus epg.xml. So the first line of code will be var epg URL equals MLB GameDay API dot get day URL with the year, month, and day that are passed in, plus epg.xml. And let's go ahead and add a slash to the end of this one so that we don't need to do slash epg.xml here. Okay, now we have a way of getting that URL. Now we need to get the data out. And normally, if this were a JSON file, we would do something like fetch epg URL, and then we'd say then, and we get some response, and we could return response.json, which would parse the JSON for us and give us an object. But since it's XML, we are unable to do that, so we'll need to use the XML parser that we installed in the previous video. So instead of returning response.json, we're going to return response.text, which just gives us the plain text, and then we'll need to parse that XML. So in the next then function here, we're going to have the text, and what I think I'd like the API to be is this. I'd like to do something like parse, return parse XML, and give it the text. And so this should return this parse XML function, which doesn't exist right now, should parse that XML text and then return it as a promise. So why don't we do that in our MLB GameDay API. Let's pause on this for now. I'm going to put to do here to indicate that it's not finished yet. And let's make another static function called parse XML, and it takes a string as an input. And what we need to do here is use our XML parser to parse that string as XML and then return the result as a promise. The reason we want it as a promise is so that we can continue chaining these .then functions. So I'm going to jump over to the XML parser GitHub page, which has some information on how to use it. And right here they say first we need to require the library. So I'm going to copy and paste that line at the top of my class here. And then to get the actual XML, we call new XML parser.parse from string. So we can copy this and put this in our parse XML function. And instead of XML text, we have an S for our variable. And then all we need to do is call return promise.resolve XML. What that does is it returns a promise whose argument is the XML right there. So back in this function now we can call this parse.xml, but we need to give it the name of the class first because it's a static function. So what we have so far is we're fetching the contents of the EPG URL, grabbing the text of the response, parsing that XML into some sort of data structure that's given to us by this React XML parser library. And then at that point, we should be able to start looking through the data and grabbing the things that we're interested in. And I want to return the final result of all of this. So get list of games will actually return a promise as well. So back in our test screen, we'll do something like MLB GameDay API.get list of games for day, and we'll pass in the day, and then we'll say .then function data, like that. That's basically how I want my API to work. And then inside of here, we'll take that data and display it on the screen or do something like that. Okay, so back over here, let's add another .then function, and we'll say that's our data. And at this point, we need to figure out how to use the XML data structure that is given to us from that library. So let's come back over here and look through the page and see if it's got any information. Not a whole lot of information here, but it looks like we have access to a function called getElementsByTagName. So we're probably going to want to look through the XML file and look for specific tags. So let's first take a look at the XML file and see how that's formatted. Looks like it's got an overall EPG element, and then inside it's got several game elements here. And each game element has a number of attributes, and the primary thing we're interested in is this game data directory attribute, because that gives us the path to the game URLs which contain all of the data for that specific game. So I think what we want to do is get all the game elements, and then of each of those we want to grab this game data directory attribute. So I'm going to create a variable called games, and here we'll say data.getElements by tag name, and we'll get the game element. And then to get an array of URLs, let's say var URLs equals games.map. And so for every game within games, we're going to do some sort of transformation. So let's say var URL equals game. Now we need to figure out how to get a specific attribute from a game object. So if I come back to the GitHub page, I can see that every element has a name, and it looks like an object of attributes and a value and children. So for us, it's an attribute, not a value, because it's still within the same XML node. So I think what we should do in our code is just say game.attributes, and I think it was called game data directory. And then we will return the URL. So now this gives us this will grab all of the game elements. This will convert all those game elements into an array of game data directory URLs. And then here, I think at the end of this one, we will do return promise.resolve URLs. And this is the same thing we did down here. So now we're returning a promise with the URLs. We can save that and then come back over to our test screen. And now this data that's returned is actually an array of URLs. So let's console.log the URLs to make sure that that's all correct. And I'm going to take out that console.log. Now we'll save and refresh and jump over to the console. And it looks like we got a warning. It says cannot find variable MLB game API. So, oops, that should be game day API. I'm not sure where I typed that. Okay, I had a typo here. It should be game day API. So let me save and refresh. Then we go back to our console, and actually we have an array of game URLs here. So that's all I wanted to do in this video, was set up a basic API for accessing data from the MLB data source. And we're going to work on this API more and more throughout the videos, but for now it looks like we're able to pull some basic data from the website, and in the next video we'll probably get a little bit more data and start showing some of that data on the screen. So thanks for watching the video.